child of the universe. There's a lot in that sentence, right? That here in Unity, we might be sort of going, huh? Yes, no, maybe, so. Because we believe that we are the thing itself. And yet, clearly, there are things like the ocean and leaves shaking on a tree. There are things that are outside of ourself. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm going to be speaking about this for the next 3 weeks, and this is part of the class that I'm going to be teaching. It's on what Ken Wilber calls the 3 faces of God. And even that can trigger us in Unity, right? Because it implies that God is a person, some sort of anthropomorphized being that literally has 3 faces. So when he's talking about faces, what Ken Wilber is really referring to is perspectives, or points of view, or even a lens. So it's the 3 perspectives of the divine. So human beings intrinsically process perspectives in 3 different ways. We process them through the first person, through the second person, and through the third person. This is across the board. It's in all cultures. It's in all languages that there is a first person, a second person, and a third person perspective, which is kind of cool when you think that it's something that is completely universal. So let's take a look at exactly what that means. So first person, because Ken Wilber can be, I love integral theory, but sometimes it is so heady, so we're going to try to break it down. So it's not just living in theory world. So when we're talking about the first person, we're talking about I. And when we're talking about I, we're talking about that inner experience, your own personal inner experience. So if this is you, each one of us could be having a different experience in this moment. For some of us, it might be joy and ecstasy at being so high and the element of adrenaline around it. And for some of us, it might be absolute terror. But for each of us, we're going to have our own personal, internal experience. And that is the first person, the I perspective. So then we get to the second person. And second person is about what we share with each other. It's about that relationship that we have with each other. And I love this picture that I found. So here we are having our own internal experience as our I, and yet we have these places of contact where we're connecting with somebody else. And that place of contact is the you. Everyone with me so far? Mm-hmm. And then we have the third person. And the third person, so the first person is sort of inner, right? And it's very subjective. It's my experience. Third person is outside of you, which we really know. Is it really outside of us? No, but we'll get to that, okay? So it appears to be outside of us. We call it it. And it is something that is objective in some way. It's something that's measurable. It's something that we can look at, that we can study, that we can reflect upon. We can discuss and have conversations about it. Everyone still with me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So these 3 perspectives, which we use all the time in your daily life, you use I, you, it, or he or she all the time, they're present in our spiritual life as well. They inform our spiritual life. So we have the first person understanding of the divine, and that one's very familiar to us, because that's the I am. Right? That is the I am, the understanding that we are the thing itself, that we are the living embodiment. Some of the other words that might fall into that would be the silence, Myrtle Fillmore's The Silence, presence, Christ Buddha consciousness. All of this is referring to the first person understanding of the divine. Second person is the beloved. Sometimes we might call that our mirror self. In some faith traditions, we're actually talking about a deity. We're talking about Jesus, or we're talking about Buddha, or we're talking about Kuan Yin. We're talking about something that we have a relationship with. I am a child of the universe. Can you feel how there's a relationship in there? Somehow I'm a child of the universe. So we're in a second person sort of understanding in that moment. Third person is also something we're very familiar with in unity, and that's the absolute. That's divine principle. That is the universe. Sometimes people call it spirit, though sometimes when people call it spirit, they're actually talking about the Holy Spirit, and in that case, where are they? Second person, right? Infinite allness, big mind. Sometimes the second person is called big heart because it's relational. So I like to think of it as the first person is about realizing God. I am the realization of the divine. And the second person is about how we relate to God. It's about how we have a relationship with that which is truly everywhere present. And then the third person is recognizing God. How do we even know it? How do we even understand it? All of it is about integrating wholeness. So there are places in this pie chart that you are more comfortable. There is a place where you feel more comfortable, depending on what your upbringing was, depending on perhaps what some of your wounding might have been. I know that when I first came out of my birth tradition is Judaism, and I know that I had such wounding around wanting to be a rabbi and being told that I couldn't because I was a woman, that I really struggled with that, recognizing God as He. Real problems with that. I had an allergy to the word He, Him, our Father, our Lord. Oh boy, was that really hard for me. Really challenging. And yet when people said our mother, she, something was able to soften within me. When I discovered New Thought and all of a sudden it was an it, I thought I was going to jump for joy. Because I was like, there's no gender. I was so excited that gender was just obliterated with the it. It made me so happy. But the part of me that struggled with the he was still wounded. Right? Can you feel that? So I had to do work in there. I had to do work to heal that part of me that was still struggling with that understanding of the divine. Same thing goes with second person. Right? I really had trouble because, again, it felt like a God outside of me. It felt like a God that I had struggled with, that didn't want me to be truly the minister, Rebbe, that I was called to be. That God out there that made the rules. So I really struggled even more with second person. And because I grew up Jewish, and because I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood, but almost all of my friends were either Greek Orthodox or Catholic, I grew up being told that I had killed Jesus. Like personally, I had killed Jesus. That was just the given. I had killed Jesus, that was what I had done because I was Jewish. So I had a serious Jesus allergy. Right? I struggled with Jesus. I was like, whoa, until I took a class and really worked through what is that for me? And I found a place where I can be in relationship with Jesus, the person who is the master. I found a place, a healing place for myself in there. But I had to do the work. I had to see it and then do the work on it. And then first person for me was the most comfortable. That was the place where I was like, oh, it was like little light bulbs going off in my head. I am it. I am it. But ultimately, we want all three to be working together. And all of us are going to try to, we're all different, so we're going to orient in different ways. We're going to be comfortable in different areas of these three faces. So the spiritual practices, the way it shows up, because this is all great in theory, but how does it really show up? And when we're talking about the I am, realizing the divine as the I am, the anchor for that is meditation. Because it is an inner experience of the divine. We anchor our realization. We are realizing the thing itself through our meditation practice. When we're relating to the divine as you, we do that through prayer, because we're actually showing up in relationship with someone else. And we are doing it through service, through sacred service, because then we're seeing the divine that is the other person, who's not really the other person. And then we have recognizing the divine as it. And that's contemplation. And a lot of times we get a little confused with the idea of contemplation and reflection about something being the fact that we actually are it. They're not the same thing. They're different aspects of how we process and hold the divine. So how many people in here go out and use nature as a way to ground themselves? Right? Because when we're in that space, what we're doing is recognizing something. We are allowing something that we know is truly ours to actually be present for us. So how conscious are you of these three faces of God in your own spiritual understanding? How present are you to what is actually driving your spiritual awareness? And there's nothing wrong with being grounded in first person. Unity is New Thought tends to live in first and third. That tends to be where New Thought is living. And then there's some of that second person that's still there. And a lot of that is because we bring it from our childhood. We bring it from what we grew up in. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of how that impacts you? Limits you, perhaps? Because you're not willing to do some of that healing work like I did. When I did that healing work around Jesus, let me tell you, doors opened in my understanding that I really was resisting in a lot of ways. So all of it is about integrated wholeness. All of it is about knowing where your strengths are, knowing where you orient yourself to, and growing those other places, those other spaces, so that you can deepen. Because ultimately, I love this quote from the Quran, God is the east and God is the west. Wherever you look, there you shall see the face of God. It doesn't matter what your in is. It doesn't matter if you're starting from first person. It doesn't matter if you're starting from third person. It doesn't matter if you're starting from second person. Ultimately, they're all pointing to the same space, the same place, the same thing. There's that very famous story of Thomas Merton when he meets the Buddhist monks, and he talks about how they immediately understood each other. The Christian mystics and the Buddhist mystics just completely connected and understood each other. And the administrative capacities of the Buddhist temples and of they did not find commonality. And that's because the mystics, regardless of whether it's second phase or third phase or fourth phase or whatever tradition you're coming from, ultimately we're all moving towards something that is universal. So within these three phases, and this is what the class is really going to focus on. The class is going to focus on where the challenges and tensions are within yourself, because each of you has your own challenges and your own tensions, your own spaces. Some of them you're completely unaware of at this moment. You don't even know what you don't know. So in the first person, in the I am, the challenge is ego versus authentic self. Right? The part of us that thinks that we know what we know, and then the actual knower that knows. And there's a tension, right? There's a challenge between those two things. In the beloved, we have codependence versus devotion. Where are we losing ourself and our sense of identity, but not in a way that is actually about being in that devotional space of truly being of service, of truly seeing the divine that is the other person. And then the biggest challenge for third person is we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about it. but we're not actually entering into the mystery and the wonder and the awe. So there's one writer, which I thought was interesting. He called the first person big mind, the second person big heart, and the third person big awe. Right? But it's about the mystery. So it's an experience of something. And contemplation is challenging because we want to talk about it. But it's all about actually being in it. So then we also have tensions between them, right? So between first and second person, we have the I know, I am the knower that knows. And second person is all about surrender. Thy will, not my will, be done. So can you feel the tension there between those two? That's a big one, right? We also have the tension between second and third, heart and mind. The heart, the intuition versus the mind and the mental capacity. Ultimately, what we want to do is line them all up. We want it all aligned. You notice in these I say and. They're not verses, they're and. Because we're going to become the larger container to hold all of it. And then between first and third, the biggest challenge is that it's the immanent right here. And the transcendent, which is out there. How do we reconcile the tension between what we understand as the truth of our life and what is showing up out there in the world? So I'm going to throw some images up because we're focusing today on the third person, on the itness, on the divine allness that is. So this is about recognition. This is about contemplation and recognition. So as these images come up, I would love to hear from you what you recognize about the divine as you see these images.
Beauty.
Beauty.
Beauty. I love the wow. Right? So what would that be maybe? Awe? Right? Awe, beauty.
Magnificence.
Magnificence.
Stillness.
Stillness, yeah.
Tranquility.
Tranquility. Mystery, right? What's through that tunnel?
Flow. Eloquence.
Flow.
Eloquence.
Eloquent. Ooh, the writer speaks. Eloquence. This is what happens. We're recognizing the divine. Notice how we keep coming back to wow? Because that's that awe and wonder that really is a big piece of it.
Perspective.
Peace, perspective. I love that.
Balance.
Balance.
Wholeness.
Wholeness. I see abundance.
Yeah. Expansiveness.
Expansiveness.
Magnificence.
Yeah.
Diversity.
Yeah. What about this one?
Symmetry.
Symmetry.
Perfection.
Perfection.
Wow.
Abundance. Balance.
I get power from this one, right? Time. Strength.
Integrity.
Integrity. Ooh, that's a good one.
Volcanic.
Yeah.
Stable.
Stable. I gotta tell you, I had so much fun finding these pictures. Exquisite, mystery,
The doorway.
the doorway,
Activity.
activity.
I know, it's like, I want to go, where is that?
Yeah, movement, right? Movement, or a call maybe, or a, right?
Desire.
Desire, invitation to something greater. The adventure, maybe. So, these are just some of the ones that I sort of threw up there. But look at that. This is what third person does for us. It enables us to recognize the divine. It enables us to name it and to see it and to name it. And what we know in our teaching is that we name it and then what do? We claim it. But if we don't know if we don't have the name for it, if we don't have something to begin with, how do we claim it? That's why third person is so important. It's especially in the way we understand prayer. We have to begin from that place of naming what it is. Now, whatever it is you named, that's your medicine. Can you feel the truth of that? Whatever you named is your medicine. Because the truth is that what you can recognize, you can realize. What you can recognize, you can realize as you. So all of these things, strength, beauty, majesty, right? Immense, whole, balanced, calm, serene, inviting, adventurous, centered, powerful. All of those things are yours. Because the image that we come back to over and over and over again is of integrated wholeness. So each of these faces is a doorway. It's a doorway that will lead you to the very heart of you as both the immanent and the transcendent. And we need all three. And part of what it means to show up as a seeker is to be willing to take a look at those spaces and those places where perhaps we are averting our gaze. Where is it that we are not quite as comfortable looking at it, and so we continually go back to where we are comfortable? And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with being comfortable, and we want to continually be accessing the infinite life that we are. I've said this before, we're never done. The divinity that we are is infinite in its expression. So whether you are a beginner on this journey, or whether you have been doing this work for a long time, there is a space and a place for you to grow, to deepen, and to expand. So I invite you to come take the class. It's really going to be experiential. We are going to spend a lot of time doing meditation around what these three faces or perspectives are. And we're going to spend time discussing where the tension appears. Where do we want to avert our gaze? And I can tell you that I taught this class a couple of years ago, and the feedback from people about the access that they gained into a different face, into a different perspective, just opened them up in a whole new way. So that's my invitation, right? What you can recognize, you can realize. So my invitation for this week is, whether you take the class or not, is I want you to go out there and I want you to be looking for the divine. I want you to be looking for the divine in all the it's that are out there. In all the things that you are seeing, that you are running into. What is the divine that's there? And I want you to come up with a list. Come up with a concrete list for yourself. Actually write it down. Because you know what? That's where your prayer life should be anchored. That's the thing that you are seeing it because it is trying to express more fully as you. What you can recognize, you can realize. But it has to start somewhere. So start with that recognition of the divine.
In the shadow as well.
What do you mean by the shadow, Marty?
In the part that I'm not embracing, in the part that seems challenging.
Yeah, you got to find the divine there. Right, so Marty, for those who couldn't hear, was saying, what about the parts that I'm not embracing? What about the parts that are challenging? And the invitation is that there is divinity there. In some ways, it's those spaces and those places where the juiciest growth is there for us. Juiciest growth, right? So that's what I'm inviting you into. And next week we're gonna look at the second face, that beloved piece, and we're gonna culminate in the I am. So let's take this into our time of meditation.